Attention listeners, mark your calendars for Colorado Gives Day on December 10th. Support Aftersight and give to the causes you care about. Go to coloradogivesday.org/organizations/aftersight between now and December 10th to make your donation.
Hey, you're listening to Blindsight. Let's go. Mental health isn't something to take lightly. It's time to fight. It's time to thrive. Let's do this.
Welcome to Blindsight. I'm your host, Bill Lundgren, and I'm here with a co-host, Jonathan Price. And today we're going to talk about a really heavy subject, but it's something that's important for us to talk about, and also both in terms of our family history as well as the prevention for the younger generation. And that's child abuse or childhood trauma, because that can affect a whole, us for the rest of our lives, unless we do something about it or get some treatment or whatever needs to be done. So, Jonathan, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Bill. It's good morning, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. It'll be good.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation on one level, and sometimes it's traumatizing for the person who's talking about it. But when we're talking about childhood trauma, we have a whole range of things. For example, my father died suddenly when I was 8 years old. That's a trauma. I had a friend of mine who his father was an alcoholic. He's a little boy sitting on his father's lap, and his father takes a lit cigarette and put the lit side into the little kid's palm.
Jeez.
And because it was his father, he could, he didn't see that as trauma. It's only when I named it later as an adult, that was really terrible what your father did. And then he finally, recognized it's true.
Good grief.
We also have trauma, particularly in the disability community. We find that sexual assault affect more people, particularly women, but men as well, with disabilities far more than those without disabilities. And because children are by nature narcissistic when they're little.
Right. Yep.
And they kind of, because the parents are taking care of them and whatever the needs are, they hopefully get it. But because they're narcissistic, they also believe that when something bad happens, it's their fault.
Yeah.
And they suppress the feeling because, I must have done something wrong, or I deserve this, or whatever it is. And yet that trauma sits in the nervous system. Now the person has been traumatized, and something similar happens, and everything's activated, or there's just some feeling of inadequacy can bring up the whole trauma of, I would be much more adequate if I didn't have this. So it has a very profound effect on people, and we're just now in the treatment community, there's a lot more work and training for counselors now in the last couple of years than in the other many, many years that I was in doing counseling, because we just didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about sexual abuse. We didn't talk about counseling. We were as prudish as anybody.
Yeah.
And yet client after client would come in and describe something to me that happened from their childhood. And I would say, that's pretty awful. What was your reaction to it? And they say, I just assume that's the way parents are supposed to punish their children for doing something wrong.
Yep.
And, and this counselor is absolutely stunned at that revelation and has to tell the client that, look, that was abuse. And sometimes as adults, that's the first time they've heard that word attached to something that happened to them.
Yeah. When it's been fun, I say fun lightly, it's been eye-opening to go through my own personal childhood trauma journey. But before I get into that, these next 2 episodes, this one included, we're going to be looking at 2 different sides of childhood trauma, where you have the childhood trauma that we're all kind of used to and we're getting known and we're diving into, which is the something bad happened to me, and now it's the little kid that's being protective of the adult and trying to address that kid to get to our better self.
Right.
And then in the next episode, we're really going to talk about the child coming back into the adult and being that free, joyful, kind of carefree child that you were before the trauma happened. And there's 2 very distinct, kind of modalities, I guess, if you will.
Right. Well, if I could give you a little background,
Yeah,
give a little background on that. One of the therapeutic ways that we look at the person in front of us, the client, is, and we can look at everybody around us as having a parental state, an adult state, and a child state. That is, at different times we can be children. Even as adults, we can play, hopefully, or we use the logic, which is the adult, or we use the parental, and ideally that's a nurturing parent. And when we talk couples therapy, we have to look at the communication style between the 2 people in front of us. And so many of us were raised with a critical parent, and that's the only one we have. So when we respond to our partner, we may come out of the critical parent. Yeah. And when we come out of the critical parent, what's going to happen? The partner may go into the childlike mode instead of being the nurturing parent and say, no, you don't do that. And it's that kind of miscommunication. And that child should be the playful child. But what label we give now to, especially in the trauma thing, is a scared child.
Right.
And that's why I wanted to get that kind of a framework for people to think about. So continue.
Yeah. And so I talk about this more in my book, but there was a childhood incident that happened when I was in 3rd grade. And before 3rd grade, I was very outgoing. I was very into people. There wasn't a single person that was not my friend. I would invite strangers into my house from the neighborhood and offer them drinks. And but even more than that, I wanted to make people feel safe. I just wanted people to know that they were loved and cared for.
Right.
And there was nothing going on in my life. It was great. My parents were fantastic. They still are. And so I ended my 2nd grade year, and we had moved kind of in the at the beginning of my 2nd grade year to Denver from Durango. And I went through 2nd grade. It was wonderful. I enjoyed the school. I loved my teacher. And then 3rd grade started. And that teacher, unfortunately, was very abusive, both emotionally, physically, and psychologically. And things like we would be standing in line, and if somebody talked, we would get the ruler, or we would something that it was kind of uncommon for, just kind of modern day education, where that wasn't necessarily the case, back 50, 60 years ago, when corporal punishment was kind of the norm for classrooms.
Right.
But moving into today, it wasn't really the I guess the physical abuse aspect of it. It was the emotional abuse part of it, where she had a method where she would say, okay, Jonathan, what grade do you think you deserve? Like, well, I think I did pretty well, so I'm going to give myself an A. First of all, you don't tell a third grader that you should give yourself your own grade.
Right.
So you would say, oh, I'm going to give myself an A. Or like I didn't do very well on this test, so maybe I'm going to give myself a C. Or maybe like, and you're trying to be honest, you're trying to self-assess, and you know, so that could be a good thing. Except then the teacher comes out and says, well, Jonathan, you I don't see it that way. You really got a D or an F. And so I think you need to change your grade. So that, coupled with the physical abuse, and, you know, she was not a very happy woman, just kind of compiled it, you know, on top of each other. And it only took 8 weeks to break me. And the child that I was before third grade versus 8 weeks was night and day different. I would come home with, you know, in third grade, a stack of like 8, 9, 10 homework sheets to do for the next day, which that's a lot for a third grader.
Sure.
You know, math and writing and English and all that good stuff. But I remember coming home with just this sense of dread, like I could never get ahead. I could never do anything well enough or good enough or be enough or say the right things. And I remember going home multiple days with really bad migraines, and I would slam my head against the wall trying to make the headache go away because that's the only thing that I could feel.
Right.
And then I would basically pass out on my bed for several hours until my mom would come wake me up for dinner. And she didn't know what to do. She was loving me the best that she could. And this was so new. This was way before like we were really diving into childhood trauma as a society. Right. And there was one particular day where it was after dinner, and I had one of these, it's from like the 60s or 70s, those really big, awful green metal desks that are those offices that are just super heavy. And so I had one of those in my basement, and the trim had come off the right-hand corner, and it exposed two of the nails that were kind of that were kind of tacked onto the trim. And it was the sharp points that were kind of hammered from the inside. And so I just remember sitting there as a third grader being like, I don't feel anything. I don't know who I am.
Right.
And I decided that I wanted to feel something. So I took my wrist and my right wrist and I jammed it onto the nails, hoping to feel something. And, you know, I had puncture marks and I was trying to hurt myself. And I was like, in my head, I was thinking, I want to leave. I don't want to be here anymore. And so in trying to take my own life as a third grader, I quickly stopped, and I don't know what stopped me, but something stopped me. And I just remember sitting back, and I don't think I did my homework, but I went to bed, and it was a couple days later, and I didn't tell my parents, but a couple days later, my dad came to school with me. I was like, well, this is weird, but this is awesome, fantastic. And he stayed with me. I'm talking from bell to bell, which is kind of unheard of. And he sat right next to me, played with me at lunch, and played wall ball, which was awesome. And then we went home. The next day, I was sitting in class, and he came in. He said, Jonathan, I need you to get all your stuff, pack up your stuff, get your pillow, get all your stuff, and go home. I had no idea what was going on. I was like, what's going on? And so I didn't argue with him, obviously. And I just grabbed my stuff and left. And I was so confused. My parents hadn't told me anything. He said, just go home. Mom's waiting for you. I thought I was in trouble because up to this point, I've been abused by my teacher. I have no idea who I am as self.
Right.
And, you know, so.
And that childhood narcissism came up. It says it must be my fault.
Exactly. So there's a lot of questions swirling around this just ambivalent or omniscient or ambient, I guess. I don't even know what word to put there, but it's just this weird environment. I don't know what's going on. I went to the house, and my mom was there. She goes, "You are never going back to that school, Jonathan." And my mom decided that she was going to homeschool me until I needed. And fortunately, in that moment, when my dad, he went off on the school, and because he saw firsthand what was going on, and he saw the inner workings of what my teacher was doing, how she was treating the kids, and how now she wasn't going full bore like she did because there was a parent in the class.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. But he showed enough.
He showed enough. Yeah. And so he got the teacher fired, and the principal was fired. But I remember going home and trying to figure out what had just happened.
Right.
Because I didn't feel in that moment necessarily that trauma, but I didn't feel free either,
right.
Which was a weird place to sit.
Yep.
My mom and my dad, to their credit, they did the best that they could, and they tried to save my life the best they could. And I'm here today, really because of them. And the really interesting thing, fast forward 30 years, it was probably 5 years ago that I actually told my parents what happened in that class or in my room that night.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long time to carry, a suicide attempt.
Absolutely.
My parents weren't all that surprised, which was odd, but they knew the trauma that I was going through.
Yeah.
So fast forward 30 years, and through my own counseling and, all of that stuff, I was on my way to, my men's Bible study. And ironically, my men's Bible study is maybe about 7 minutes from that school. And I have to drive by that school every time I'd go to my men's Bible study. So that was fun. Especially going through, some of the like EMDR, or which I'm a big proponent of. If you don't know what that is,
right.
Really check it out. It's was it eye movement desensitization.
I can never remember the acronym.
It's one of those. It's one of the few acronyms that I can't still to this day get
both,
right.
And I got trained in it.
I know it's so weird. I know. But
we'll talk about that in the treatment area next session.
But going through that trauma session and going through the counseling, and I just remember one day driving to the Bible study, and I got really convicted. I was like, "You need to go forgive these people." I was like, "I don't know where they live. I don't even know if they're alive." And so after my Bible study, I drove to the parking lot of the school, and I sat in that parking lot for about 2 hours. It was a pretty surreal experience. I cried and prayed, and I forgave them. And that whole day changed my life. Yeah. Because from that day forward, I became the person and the man that I wanted to be. And I'm alive now. I'm very happy to be alive. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And that, I hope, can help people to understand what it's like, and maybe relate to in terms of their own life, because this is trauma that we're talking about, and the effects when you became an adult. And more than that, one of the ways that you may have to deal with the trauma is forgiveness of the individual.
Well, the beauty was after the forgiveness. I don't know what, there was this like lightness and this power that I had, that
Absolutely.
I was able to be who I wanted to be.
Exactly.
And that's really the point of all of that. Going through the hard times and the work, it's hard,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so worth it. It's so worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. To heal, sometimes it's very painful, the healing process, but at the end, it's worth it.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to minimize people's trauma, because there are people who have been through way more, forgive me, shit than I have been.
God does not matter.
And no, it doesn't.
Your trauma is your trauma.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
That's exactly right. And
Right.
that's where I was going, because you could have a situation similar to mine. You could have one that is either more intense or less intense. The thing is that trauma is trauma. And because nobody lives your life, they don't have the right, I guess, if that's the best way to put it. They don't really have the right to tell you that your lived experience is trauma or not.
No.
A lot of times, even to the detriment of ourselves, we bury that trauma, much like I did.
Exactly.
And, we say, oh, my trauma was like, I just thought that like what you said in the beginning, I thought that was normal.
Yeah.
And for me, it was normal because my parents had always taught me that you respect your teacher, you listen to your teacher, because the teacher is the extension of the parent. And I heard my parents say all the time, your teacher is an extension of us. So if you don't listen to your teacher, you don't listen to us.
Yep,
and
that's right.
Which is a really confusing place to be in as a child, especially when you have people in authority who are abusing that authority. And you're like, okay, well, if she's abusing me, that means my parents must be okay with that.
That's right.
And so there was an association.
But at the same time, not to forgive the teacher or say anything, but for a period of time, there was a belief that in order to make students fight to achieve, you don't praise them, but you point out how they could do better. There's a whole school. Teachers were taught that. Parents were taught that. It was abusive.
Yeah.
And the idea being, if you praise them, the kid will give up and won't try to do any better. That was the theory. If you treat them, with loving kindness, they'll take advantage of it and not try to do better. So if we want kids to get better, we need to give them really a school of hard knocks.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I hope one day that we can have my mom on the show, because she, for a non-psycho, she wasn't in psychology, but she was in communication and understands people very, very well. She always had this thing where she would say yes to just about everything. If it was dangerous, yes, just be careful, or yes, try to figure it out. Or very rarely would she say no, which flew in the face of all of that teaching.
Exactly.
And I think that was part of the healing journey.
Yeah.
My parents' ability to say yes. But when we are going through our trauma journey, you have to remember, and I had to remember this, that the trauma, in a sense, does define you at the beginning. That is your identity. You associate with that trauma in a very real way. But I'm here to tell you that you don't have to be.
Exactly.
It can shape you, because it shaped me. But it will not define you.
But you see, when we believe the adult know what's right, then we even though something feels awful to us, we assume that they're doing the right thing for us. And then we begin to doubt who we are, as you said, to doubt that our feelings, we doubt our feelings, period. We're not supposed to feel because they're doing something awful to us because we don't know it's awful. And our whole view of the world and ourselves in the world is totally skewed when you have an abuser somewhere in our lives.
That's right.
And that's what we're trying to deal with now. Therapists like me are having to deal with the trauma of childhood and even getting people to understand that they were traumatized by these people who were supposed to be protecting us.
Yeah.
And that's when we talk about betrayal.
Yep. Well, yeah, you're not dealing with just the trauma. You're dealing with the lies and the deceit or at least even the illusion of lies and deceit, because even though there may have not have been straight out lies, which there are, but even though there may not have been the all out, I'm lying to your face for a particular reason, that still feels like a betrayal.
Yep, absolutely. And you see, in a peculiar sense, in my own history, when my father died suddenly, I was put in a position of being the parentified child. I was told, you're the man of the house. I'm 8 years old, and I'm told I'm the man of the house, which is bewildering. What does that mean? What am I supposed to do?
Right.
But the other piece is that for years and years and years, I was so angry at my father for abandoning me. He didn't have any control over it. But to an 8-year-old, it felt like abandonment. But because it was not right to blame your father or say anything terrible about your father. It wasn't until I was doing a group program on family dynamics that I got in touch with it and finally was able to, in front of people, say what I'd been afraid to say since I was 8 years old. And that was such a relief, even though, because there was absolutely no reason I should feel, I quote, should feel that way, but I did. Right. And that was the disconnect there. As you say, you're feeling this way, but this teacher is supposed to know, there must be something wrong with me.
Well, I want to make two final points before we get to wrapping up. The first being, you own your trauma, because that child is going to try to protect the adult. Right. And when that child is in, I'm going to say, control of an adult's reactions, it becomes very difficult to live life to the fullest.
You got it.
The second point is this. If you're a parent, a grandparent, a teacher, somebody who is interacting with children on a daily basis, first of all, thank you. Second, please pay attention to how a child is behaving. Look at their fingers. Are they chomping off their nails? Are they pulling the skin around their fingers? Are they acting differently than they would normally act? Are you seeing a pattern? And when that happens, have a conversation, maybe not with them necessarily, but with an adult, with another teacher, ask some questions. And then to the therapists, I'm so excited because we have now in the last maybe 20 years, roughly, this whole new arena to play in of child psychology and child therapy. My son went through play therapy because our divorce was pretty traumatic for him. And, to see his change from when we were first going through it to now, he now has a voice, and he's he turned 8 years old as this came out, but now he has a voice and he's back to his normal, quote unquote, normal everyday self. But we caught it early. We didn't wait 30 years to address a topic that could have festered. We talked about anxiety for the last couple of weeks. those anxious thoughts that he may have been having perpetuated over 30 years, that's an exponential crippling of a psyche.
That's right.
And that's what happened to me. And that's what happens to most adults, because we weren't smart enough to catch it when we were kids. We didn't know how to speak into those things.
Weren't smart enough to catch it and to understand.
And, and it takes those loving people in our lives to gently say, hey, look, you've been through trauma. You were abused. You had those cigarette burns in the palm of your hand. Your dad left you. That is trauma. That is the definition of trauma. Let's address it. Let's move through it.
Right.
And let's get you on the other side and become a joyful and wonderful person.
Exactly. And part of it is, some people are very afraid of that, because that means they have to say that the adults in their lives were bad people, and that's not what we do.
Right.
We talk about what happened to you, and then the people who did it have to deal with it on their own.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're dealing with is the effect on you and freeing you up to move you from the scared child in relation to everything, and how you're dealing with life, to the playful child, the appropriate way when you're an adult, to be able to tap into that playful child. And that's what you're talking about. And we'll talk about that in the next session. And thank you very much, because when we get a real life situation, it's all the more meaningful than a counselor talking about, well, this is what happened and this was what happened. I thank you for sharing what you did. Yeah. And I also congratulations for getting through it and being able to heal from it.
It's been a long journey, but it's been worth it.
Yep, it's been worth it. It is, unfortunately, it is a long journey, but the end result shows us the importance of it. Yeah, and the freedom, particularly when so often the person who's abused, it goes to the next generation.
Yeah.
In that person may abuse their children without realizing what they're doing.
Yep.
And that's what we need to stop. And that's why we're talking about this. And people with disabilities, don't be afraid to tell people what's happening, because it's not your fault.
Right.
And that's the message I hope we're getting across. Any final words other than what you've offered already, Jonathan?
Yeah, I just want to say that it's okay to own your trauma. Mm-hmm. It's okay to shoulder that for a moment, because sometimes when you shoulder those traumas and you shoulder those burdens, there's an act of consciously putting them down. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we think of the burial or the putting to the side some of the traumas that we have, but really in understanding and how to deal with that trauma, you have to be able to pick it up, look at it, examine it, wear it for a time with a counselor, with a therapist, and then consciously put it down.
And then also, when you put down the self-blame that may have come with that trauma.
Right. Say, it's all encompassing.
Yeah, exactly.
But there has to be that conscious picking it up, and there has to be the conscious of putting it down and laying it to rest.
You got it.
It's got to be in the forefront of your mind. But next week is going to be awesome, because we're going to be talking about letting the really cool, amazing child back into your life and how amazing that can be.
And that's something to look forward to. And thank you for listening. This has been an episode of Blindsight with Jonathan Price and myself, Bill Lundgren. If you have any feedback for us, please don't hesitate to either call our feedback line at 720-712-8856, or send us an email at feedback@aftersight.org. And we read those feedback. We take it to heart, and it can help us in shaping future programs. So have a good week. And if it stirred up some stuff in you and you feel like you need some help right away, don't forget there is a hotline, 988. Just dial 988, a nationwide hotline. People available 24/7 to talk to you on the phone, to help you to get some of that stuff out and also make some recommendations as to who you might want to see. So this is Blindsight. See you next time.